Please help me change the paradigm of healthcare.
The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I'm the founder of Holistic Caring. We're based here in California, and we do educational programs and case management for patients on how to use cannabis therapeutically as a medicine.
We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing.
As the founder of Holistic Caring, I basically oversee the whole ship, and what we're doing is progressive education.
Cannabis actually supports all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or not do something. Because the plant was prohibited, it prevented health professionals, doctors and nurses from learning about cannabis as medicine.
I want to change the paradigm of healthcare, and us paving the way into a new vanguard of medicine.
It's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about teaching people how to feel good, bridging the gap from what they're not getting from traditional medicine, utilizing different plant medicines, adaptogens, tips, tricks, hugs, and nugs of information to support and nourish the most important system in our body.
It's a lot of soul work, a lot of love, a lot of discipline, and meditation. I'm using my life work as a testimony to others to learn how they can be their own hero and then go help heal the world.
And we are, as nurses, the game changers. All right, everyone, welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, monthly clinical conversations where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. We're here to change the dialogue and stigma around what it means to feel good and be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. It's okay to feel good. Everyone deserves to feel good, and so do you. And that is why we do what we do here as nurses. So the Green Nurse Podcast, Clinical Conversations webcast, came about when Nurse Elizabeth and I merged our companies at Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse alongside of Bloom Hemp, creating Holistic Caring Network. Clinical Conversations explores all aspects of how to optimize cannabis as medicine. People are making great medicines. People are selling these amazing formulations, yet no one is truly interpreting how to use cannabis as medicine, and that is what we do. I don't know if you all know this, but cannabis nursing has been recognized as a specialty, and nurses are truly making an impact on advocating for the safe therapeutic use of cannabis, and that includes teaching safe consumption and how to mitigate side effects if someone accidentally overconsumes too much THC. This month's clinical discussion focuses on inviting other experts to educate our community about safe consumption. We're delighted to have special guests this month presenting on Get Soft Landing, the reverse edible. Our guests were just recently on the Green Nurse Podcast, sharing their journey to cannabis and how they crafted a product line for safer cannabis consumption experience. And we have that link that it was in the show notes. So I'm going to introduce Alice Stone and her son, Eli Stoloff, along with author of their slides, Dr. Oren Levy, will be presenting alongside of us in webinar format on their product, Soft Landing, the reverse edible. Alice Stone has been a documentary filmmaker for over 30 years. She invented Sipify, an innovative reusable straw that helps people sip more confidently. Soft Landing is her new wellness company she founded with her son, Eli Stoloff. Eli Stoloff is a graduate of the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University, with an extensive course load featuring entrepreneurship, marketing strategy, and finance, he is prepared and excited to apply his education to operating Soft Landing. They're launching the first ever reverse edible that counteracts the psychoactive effects of THC. And if you're using cannabis medicinally and you don't always want the psychoactive effect, or if you're pleasantly high and suddenly life intervenes and you need to dial it back down, their chocolates will give you the Soft Landing. And of course, if you find yourself way too high, we've all been there, Soft Landing, chocolate or two is the solution. So today's webinar format will start off with Nurse Elizabeth and I discussing therapeutic use of cannabis and safe consumption, greening out on THC overconsumption, THC and the need for a functional antidote that won't take away the medicinal effects of THC. And then we're going to turn the presenters over to our guests today, to Alice, Eli, and Dr. Levi, to present on their slides on Soft Landing's active ingredient, a promising compound for mitigating THC intoxicating effects, the neuroprotective benefits of Soft Landing's active ingredient, receptors and pathways mediating the neuroprotective effects of Soft Landing's active ingredient. We'll end with Q&A and wrap up the presentations with our offerings. So this webinar and clinical conversation is being brought to you by, is being sponsored by Bloom Hemp CBD. And Bloom Hemp is a CBD emporium owned by women and nurses, championing quality, safety, and patient-centered care. Their range features organic CBD products formulated by doctors and nurses to target specific symptoms. Bloom Hemp CBD offers a free nurse line and a free email care plans with product recommendations and lifestyle tips. Thank you, Bloom Hemp, for sponsoring the show today. And we're going to get started on our presentation.
Hello. Yeah. So yeah.
Clinical conversation, Soft Landing, the reverse edible. So I just did the introduction. I'm here with Elizabeth Mack, and we're going to get started. Next slide. There we go.
Quick disclaimer, we're not going to read it all, but this is not medical advice, and please consult your physician if you have any further questions. Okay, and we like to start with, have you ever heard, cannabis saved my life, cannabis gave me my life back, cannabis is giving me a better day, cannabis has improved my quality of life, and it is helping me to live my best life. That is the therapeutic use of cannabis, bringing high across all health domains. Hope, inspiration, growth, and healing is the way we break down high, addressing our spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, and social health. Cannabis works so well for so many different patient populations and conditions because it affects the body and the mind in such a way as to support and fortify the body's capacity for self-healing and resilience by promoting the relaxation response, which is where we heal. Cannabis nursing is identified by the American Cannabis Nursing Association as a specialty nursing practice focused on the care of the healthcare consumer seeking education and guidance in the therapeutic use of cannabis.
And the therapeutic use of cannabis is the use of cannabis products for medicinal, wellness, and healing purposes. It is personal and subjective to each consumer, with objective criteria being improvement in functionality in one or more of the 5 health domains: biological, mental, emotional, spiritual, or social, without negatively impacting any of the others. So I'm not sure if you all heard the phrase by Vincent DiMarzo, but eat, sleep, relax, forget, protect. I love that. You know, this is what cannabinoids do. Our autonomic systems are modulated by endocannabinoids, seeking to balance out physiological symptoms for homeostasis or balance among all of the subsystems. So if you think about it, we are made up of 30 trillion cells broken down into 11 organ systems, our immune system, and it's regulated by a master regulatory system called the endocannabinoid system. And when we're talking about use and misuse of cannabis or adverse effects are generally from using too much THC or unregulated products. This has been our experience in our 10 years each of doing cannabis nursing. And we always like to state that recreational adult use is not misuse. right? Euphoria is not a crime. It is okay for people to feel good. This is about doing it safely. Every variable contributes to the therapeutic use and the experienced effect because we're working with the endocannabinoid system that knows how to use cannabinoids, and also the endocannabinoid dome, which incorporates the endocannabinoid system, the lipid dome, the microbiome, and other constituents for neurotransmission to correct cell signaling.
It's all about that Goldilocks response.
That's right.
So medical, wellness, and adult use, it's all the same as long as you're safe, right? We all react differently to cannabis, and this is what we teach. Your age, your gender, your genetics, which play a big factor in how you break it down, your medical history, and pharmaceuticals you're taking all contribute to how you experience cannabis. Prior experience with cannabis, other drugs that are psychoactive, and alcohol also helps to be able to understand the psychoactive response. Also, which route you use, smoking versus edibles versus topicals, they're all very different and play differently in the body. Which cannabinoids you use, whether it's CBD, THC, the minor cannabinoids and terpenes. And anybody that's new to cannabis needs to start low and go slow with any THC product. We tell people to wake up the endocannabinoid system by starting with CBD before trying THC to get the receptors active and ready to receive that and to understand things. And also CBD in the body can help soften THC as well. Starting with topicals, tinctures, inhalation, and low-dose edibles is the way forward. And always journal to track your results of what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you don't want to repeat again, and track your consumption so that you can meet desired health goals, which on a medical side is what most people want to do. On the recreational and adult use side, it's about having fun, and that's where we want to keep people safe. So optimize the experience of safe consumption by thinking proactively, and we like to say prepare and prevent instead of repair and repent. Okay.
There we go. Okay. THC dosing matters. It's really important. We're really looking for that sweet spot, right? So when people are new to cannabis, go easy on the THC. You know, we don't generally see people overconsume CBD. But with THC, too much THC can cause a downregulation in our own cannabinoid receptors. The endocannabinoid system is the largest neuroregulatory system in our body, balancing all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all of the neurotransmitters. Too much THC can temporarily slow down your body's own anandamide production. The plant makes THC, we make anandamide. The molecular structure is very similar, right? And we need to activate the CB1 and CB2 receptors. We want to take enough THC to not downregulate the system. We want that sweet spot. Too much THC can impair the stress response, changing impulsivity and reward sensitivity. Yeah. So too much THC can impair the stress response, change impulsivity and reward sensitivity, specifically with dopamine signaling and production, can cause issues with addiction over time. Also, too much THC can lead to cannabis use disorder, or in very rare cases, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. So we're looking for that optimal dose, specifically for those consumers that have mental health challenges, right? You know, a little bit of THC might not do anything. Too much THC may cause anxiety. And, you know, the sweet spot is somewhere right in the middle.
Okay. And so what we're here for, this is our last slide that we're going to cover, you know, greening out. What is a THC overdose and what does that feel like? Well, consuming too much THC can be a horrible experience with varying degrees of dysphoria. We talk about euphoria, which is, you know, what people want to achieve, where you feel great and relaxed. Dysphoria is the opposite, where you're panicked and you feel very badly. It is not fatal. There are no CB1 receptors in the cardiac respiratory centers of the brain, so you can't die, but you might feel like you're dying. So symptoms of anxiety, panic, paranoia, sense of doom, coldness, hallucinations, lack of coordination, tachycardia, hypertension, poor concentration, nausea and vomiting can happen with excessive THC. Effects are dose dependent, lasting for the duration of the dose up to 10 plus hours, depending on dosing. And the current treatment is grounding, getting into the earth and nature, reassurance for others, hydration with water or something with a little bit of sugar in it, warm up, get cold, depending on what they're feeling, distraction, deep breathing, eating as able, and getting the blood sugar back up because it might have dropped from THC. Using CBD via a vape or tincture can also help unwind THC from the CB1 receptor, although most people know that you need to have CBD on board ahead of using THC and not just mitigating it on the back end. Centuries-old remedies for THC overconsumption is lemons. Lemon juice, back to Ethan Russo's research, finding that has been something people have used for a long time, as well as black peppercorns. So some people end up going to the ER and getting benzodiazepines and antipsychotics, and that's no fun because you also get cannabis use disorder on your medical record, which most people don't know about. So this is the last slide.
Yep. Before we get started, and then we're going to get our poll question. So, and as nurses, we take care of all of these patients here. We take care of a lot of vulnerable healthcare consumers, right? And we have to think of patient considerations. So the vulnerable consumer populations are those that actually have the most to benefit from cannabis as medicine. It's critical to look at risk-benefit ratio for each patient who fits into these categories. So pediatrics, children, adolescents, developing brain and legal issues. Geriatrics, we have the aging folks and the prescription clearance and drug clearance, and everything slows down when you get older. The Beers list, all these drugs that older folks should not be taking and the potential risk for falls. And then pregnancy, the developing fetus, there's legal issues with child protective services, and there's no active research. And then mental health, safety considerations and prevention of adverse side effects or worsening psychiatric symptoms or conditions. So we're painting a picture here. What if there was a solution available in a product to help prevent adverse effects of taking too much THC without taking away the medicinal effect? We're going to start our first poll now, and then we're going to let our guests speak. So the first question we have here, have you ever unintentionally overconsumed THC or had a bad reaction? If you could answer the poll, that would be awesome.
Yep. Just I'll take two deep breaths and then we'll close it out. And let's see.
Publish results. Okay. And then the next question, back to the list, is, have you ever used soft landing product before? Is anyone?
I have. 2, 3, 4.
Okay. All right, only 50% answered. Okay, that's the list. And then the next one is, what products have you tried or used for overconsumption of THC?
So there's a list.
So people that have had issues before, you want to just answer the lemons, black peppercorns, undo, CBD, fresh air, get cold. There we go. Okay, 50% voted. And then the final one is, here you go. Would you be more open to using THC if you knew you had a product that could reverse the psychoactive effects without taking away the medicinal effect?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Who wouldn't? Okay, I'm going to publish that result. And then we are going to advance the next slide.
All right. So now we're going to introduce Alice and Eli to introduce Dr. Oren Levy. And then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for having us on this webinar. We love talking about soft landing. We're a mother-son company, and our sort of light bulb moment was when Eli was in his senior year of college, and he mentioned to me that he kept hearing about all of these students who would overdo it on edibles, and they would go to University Health Services just begging, make it stop, and they were just told, we have nothing for you, you'll just have to wait it out. And so I have always been a user of many different forms of alternative medicine. And so I just got curious if there was any sort of natural remedy out there. And so Eli and I both kind of bounced around PubMed and landed on this peer-reviewed study of what became our active ingredient. But Eli really spent about 18 months sourcing materials, trying different combinations, making something that would be pleasant tasting. And it took a while, and we finally had something that we were pretty sure worked. And we did a quick little friends and family study, very encouraging results. And then we hired a cannabis nurse. That's when we learned, as you said, it's a recognized certification. And we hired a cannabis nurse who has a lot of experience with clinical trials and really IRB, hospital-based clinical trials. And she developed a questionnaire for us. And then she recruited participants, and they consumed cannabis in the form of their choice. And then they tried soft landing. And her results showed about 80% of people found it was effective or very effective. And many of them wrote in open response that they were just amazed at how quickly it worked. So we were yet more encouraged. And we have since then just amassed lots and lots of anecdotal evidence. And we've also learned more about cannabis use in the cannabis industry. And while overconsumption is a real problem that is really crying out for a solution, there are many other uses for soft landing that Eli is going to talk about.
Yeah, so in that process, what we found out was that we had achieved our goal in finally finding the solution for overconsumption, but that's not all we found. Soft landing has a potential to be the solution for overconsumption and so much more. For example, so medicinal patients who need to consume cannabis to alleviate a variety of illnesses, they might not want to be high at all, right? So with our product, they're able to take the psychoactive effects out of the plant while still retaining the medicinal benefits, and which is so vital to their healing. In talking with nurses and doctors, we've also learned that there is a large number of patients who are suffering from these illnesses but are reluctant to try plant medicine for whatever stigma or fear of consuming cannabis they may have. A product like soft landing would allow them to eliminate those fears and really retain the benefits of plant medicine that they're missing out on. And then on the recreational side, there's like what we like to call the life intervening moments. Like, say for example, I don't have kids, but let's say I did. So I have kids, and their grandmother is going to take them away for the day, take them to the amusement park or whatever, and I got a kid-free day. So I'm going to smoke a joint and watch a movie. You know, we're just out of the title credits when all of a sudden the phone rings and the kid's throwing up, got to bring him home. And it's like, I'm high, what do I do? Oh, I have soft landing in the cupboard. So you never know when life's going to intervene and you suddenly need to come down, but we are your solution. Furthermore, there's a lot of, and just on a recreational standpoint, medicinal too, people who, and this kind of falls under overconsumption, but people who suffer from paranoia or anxiety associated with their cannabis use, soft landing is a way to eliminate that and just get all the making every cannabis experience a positive one. And then even more, there's fitting cannabis into your busy life. You know, say you're a student and you have a group project you're working on at night, but you just got out of classes for the day and it's a nice day out and you want to consume cannabis and listen to some music outside. Now you can kind of do both. You take that soft landing and you're ready to go. And then the last thing we like to talk about is exploring your can of curiosity. I think you guys had touched on it earlier that there's a ton of different products and different methods of consumption with different potencies, and it can be a little daunting. And you know, you be in that dispensary aisle and say, "Oh, that looks scary." With soft landing in your back pocket, you have the security to try whatever you'd like.
So that's our motto. We just you're in control, and you can be as high as you want to be when you want to be. So
Okay.
we had this product, and we felt like we didn't really understand exactly how it worked. So we reached out to Dr. Levy, and Dr. Levy is an assistant professor of anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School, and he's a scientific investigator at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And he conducted an extensive report for us all about our active ingredient. He's going to present his findings to you now.
Thanks, everyone. Really great intro, by the way. You know, not only Eli and and Alice, but also I think Sharon and Elizabeth, you really set up the stage really nicely for what we're going to talk about. So that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, what I've done is at the end of the day, I'm a scientist. I have my own lab at Harvard Med School and Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I spent 4 years as head of R&D in the cannabis industry before I rejoined Brigham. And clearly, I was that interested in cannabis. And once Alice and Eli approached me to look into the active ingredient, I was really intrigued because, I look at things almost entirely kind of like on a scientific prism. And for me, hearing about the anecdotal evidence they had with their product sounded extremely promising. And as in many times in the cannabis field, and I think you guys as nurses know it probably better than anyone else, the anecdotal evidence sometimes carries a lot of weight that people sometimes overlooks for some reason. So I decided to really take a deep dive into the science of this ingredient and, see how it may actually work and if it all makes sense. And as I was diving into the literature, all peer-reviewed scientific journals, scientific papers published in really great journals, I found out that there's quite a lot of evidence using this ingredient and how it may benefit mostly the neurological system. So if we go to the next slide, I think that you guys set up the stage really nicely with the risk of overconsumption. People can use cannabis. It's great. A lot of benefits, obviously, medical benefits, and also, spiritual and overall relaxation and mood and coordination and a lot of phenomenal effects. However, we know there's adverse effects. So it's not fatal, but there's an alarmingly increasing number of patients actually getting to ERs after overconsumption of THC. And although it may not kill them, depends on what they combine it with. It actually may kill them if they combine it with something really bad. But cannabis itself is not going to kill them, of course. But really, a lot of pretty nasty side effects. It goes from like anxiety, extreme paranoia, hallucinations, confusion, and also some pretty hardcore kind of like physical outcomes as well, right? Like rapid heart rate, high blood pressure, impaired coordination, cognitive dysfunction. So this could be pretty nasty. And as you mentioned, they can get some fluids. If things get really bad, they can get some antipsychotics, they can get some benzos. But at the end of the day, there's no antidote. There's nothing that those folks can take in the case of overconsumption that could immediately mitigate or alleviate some of those pretty nasty symptoms. This is not like opioid overdose that you got naloxone and people can just take it and immediately kind of like reverse the effect. So I think in many ways, this is almost like the holy grail for this industry. And even when I was in the cannabis industry, this is something we often looked at. We started exploring some options of, it would be great if we have something that can immediately reverse the effect or at least mitigate some of the effects. So really looking into the active ingredient that soft landing has got, I've seen and I heard a lot of the anecdotal evidence people had. I have to admit, I tried it once, but I didn't try it after consuming THC, so I don't know what it's for worth. I can tell you it really relaxed me. But I was like, probably I'm not, not the best tester, but many people have tried it after they used THC, and I've seen that this data, and it looked really impressive. And again, I really wanted to see if there's something in there on the science side, on the biology, that may explain the effects that people have been seeing. And so I conducted almost like completely unbiased, independent search into the literature, read dozens of papers, summarized them into this report to see what might explain this effect. how might this ingredient actually reverse or mitigate some of the effects of THC. And if we go to the next slide, what we saw is actually a pretty substantial body of evidence to show the significant neuroprotective effect that this ingredient has. Now, I must admit, this even surprised me. And, Alice can witness, when we first spoke, I really thought I'm going to maybe bump into a paper or 2 or 3 or 5. And I ended up with, well over 50 papers documenting the effect of this ingredient. Now, I will say, one really important thing is this ingredient is considered safe for consumption by the FDA. It's on the GRAS list of the FDA. So we know it's safe to consume. And also it exists in many plants. So it's a natural product, including in plants that people consume anyway. So it ended up in that list. On the other side of that, and that really kind of bummed me out as a scientist, as in many cases with natural compounds, there were no real clinical trials trying to see the efficacy of this compound because it's a natural compound. There's not a lot of, interest for pharma companies, etc., to actually do a study and spend millions of dollars to see what they do. So we end up with some pretty cool anecdotal evidence that's starting to build up in human, and quite a lot of preclinical data done in animal models. And what those studies show quite consistently is true neuroprotective effects of this ingredient in a variety of animal models. So there's quite a lot of examples. I really didn't want to show everything out of the 50 plus papers we've looked at, but one really strong effect it has, and that's really a common thread of that ingredient, is the ability to reduce neuroinflammation. Now, neuroinflammation drives many neurodegenerative diseases. It's a hallmark of multiple sclerosis, it's a hallmark of Alzheimer's, it's a hallmark of Parkinson's disease. And the minute that you have an ingredient that's capable of suppressing neuroinflammation, eventually it could lead to alleviation of symptoms as well. And one of the things that we see here is actually that this ingredient, when administered to mice, either prophylactically, so before inducing neuroinflammation, or as a therapeutic intervention after symptoms have already appeared, we can see that this ingredient diminishes the disease severity of what we call EAE. It's a multiple sclerosis-like model. It's a neuroinflammation model. What happens is that after mice are being induced basically to get this neuroinflammation, this multiple sclerosis-like symptoms, obviously there's issue with motor function and paralysis and weakness in the limb, and there's a way to calculate a clinical score. And what we see here is that when this ingredient was given prophylactically, as well as after the show of symptoms, it significantly diminished the severity of disease. And it's doing it by basically diminishing neuroinflammation. So this was a really important hint for us. And if we go to the next slide, I think this thread of neuroinflammation also comes to many cognitive functions. Now, everyone is familiar with cognitive functions in response to, many neurodegenerative diseases we know, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson. And various animal models show that consumption of this ingredient actually alleviated symptoms of cognitive decline in all of those disease models. And just as a couple of quick examples, we see here a condition called postoperative cognitive decline. So usually when animals are being, under surgery, that's often happens in aging human as well. There is a postoperative cognitive decline. This model in this case basically shows you or track the path that the animal did after the surgery. So you see if it's control without surgery, it does a pretty elaborate path. It's not afraid to get out. It's not afraid to explore. After surgery, you can see a very shortened path. It didn't really go to the center a lot, as you can see. It kind of did a pretty short path, was a little bit afraid, and didn't really remember where to go. And when you do the surgery plus this ingredient, it actually almost comes back to without a surgery. You can see an elaborated path, you can see an exploratory behavior, and you can see a cognitive decline that was basically mitigated by this compound. On the other side of the slide here, you see a dementia model induced by aluminum chloride. It's a very known model of inducing dementia in rats. And what they've done here is they trigger the dementia, and then they treat it with this ingredient. And there's a variety of assays you can do in order to explore or verify the memory of rats. Actually, I know it may sound funny, but it's like a whole field of research dedicated to developing those behavioral models and tracking them, and it's all very quantitative. And I can tell you, I sometimes wish that the human studies would have been at that level of elaboration and details. But really, what they showed here is that in an array of assays that they've done, and in this case, it's called target quadrant entries, how many times was the animal confident and had the memory to go into specific areas in the cage or in the maze. And in this case, again, as you can see here, the higher dose of this ingredient, which is the yellow line here, basically brings it back to control level. So again, you can see beneficial effects of these ingredients, this case in a dementia model. If we go to the next slide, a different example here, and that's actually some really cool information. And again, this is like the tip of the iceberg, because I could have been here talking for like 8 hours or something, but I'm keeping it short, trust me. We mentioned that one of the most abundant adverse effects of THC overconsumption is anxiety. Everyone can speak to that. I don't know a single person that tried THC and at some point didn't feel that anxiety, borderline paranoia. And what they've done here is that they actually administered this ingredient that soft landing product has, and they looked at depression and anxiety-like behavior. So first of all, here on the left, you can see that when the animals were treated with this ingredient, you can see basically an increase in the exploratory behavior, which basically show anxiolytic effect, right? It's reduced anxiety, it's more exploratory. A lot of those assays, by the way, I'm not gonna get into the detail of which assay, why it's done, but a lot of it is based on the concept that rats or mice, they have like areas they feel are more protected, right? Like closed spaces, dark, versus open space, light, right? So a lot of those assays are based on how exploratory they are, how willing are they to actually get out of the dark and get into the light, or be in the open space of the maze, etc. So what you can see here, you can see increased in exploratory behavior, which basically is indication of anxiolytic behavior. You can see here even alleviation of depression-like behavior. This is actually a behavior that's a test that's called novelty suppression feeding. So basically, you're testing if the rat is willing to eat food in like a new space. Is it willing to explore a new space? And that again is a sign often of, is it antidepressant? Is it anti-anxiolytic? And you can see here that this ingredient actually improved this depression symptom. And here on the right side, it's actually an obsessive compulsive like behavior, because it's the marble bearing test. I mean, I don't know how many times you had a chance to see rats bearing marbles, but you can almost imagine going to the yard and seeing squirrels bearing nuts or like walnuts, right? So actually, the more nuts they bury, the more time they spend digging, is actually a sign of obsessive compulsive behavior. And you can see that this ingredient even alleviates those type of symptoms. And what they've shown here is that when they took a CB2R antagonist, the effect of this ingredient was actually reversed. So at least partially, it appears as this ingredient actually acts as an agonist of the CB2 receptor. We know it's a selective agonist of the CB2 receptor, and it appears to mediate those anxiolytic effects. So for me, and again, this is one study out of many, showing that one potential mechanism in which this ingredient may mitigate the side effects of THC is through this anxiolytic mechanism, through the CB2 receptor. We're going to the next slide. So what we see here is another example in which a high-fat fructose diet, that's something that actually causes neurobehavioral changes in rats. Probably causes some behavioral changes in humans too, by the way, but for sure in rats, it causes neurobehavioral changes. And what you can see here is that when you combine this diet, you can see the decline. You can see that there's an increase in anxiety. You can see a decline in cognitive function, actually, a decline in spatial memory. Once you have this diet, but also give this ingredient, there's significant alleviation of anxiety. There's improved spatial memory. And very interestingly, in this case, it's not only mediated by the CB2 receptor, but also by another receptor called PPR gamma, and through increased level of BDNF. Now, BDNF is a big deal. It's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's known to have neuroprotective effects. So the fact that this ingredient, when consumed, actually in this model, increased level of BDNF, as a result, likely gave us increased survival and protection of our neurons, and eventually this translated to improved cognitive functions. I mean, that's what we're seeing here, essentially. So it's almost like we're seeing a whole thread here, at least in this study, in this model, how this compound, and again, this is actually demonstrated in multiple studies, as significant neuroprotective effects. And as a result, you can see anxiolytic effects, you can see improved cognitive function. It also has some pain relief impact as well. And I think overall, all of this kind of draws a pretty clear picture of how this ingredient actually mitigates some of the nasty adverse effects of THC overconsumption. If we go to the next one, this was really interesting because this is basically another cognitive function, but in this case, it's an amnesia model triggered by a compound called scopolamine. It actually, in many ways, mimics Alzheimer's disease. So you're able to cause amnesia to the animal once you inject scopolamine. And in this case, what they've done when they did it, obviously there was like a decline in memory function. In this case, in what they call a novel object recognition test to see if the animal can recognize novel objects. Again, the impressive thing here was that when you combine scopolamine, which again is very well-known amnesia model, when you combine this with our ingredient, or in this case, it's the seed extract containing our ingredient, you can actually see improved memory function. And you can also see improved long-term spatial memory. Now, this is super big, again, for everyone that ever, overconsume THC. Spatial memory can get screwed. Let's face it. You really do not want to drive. You really do not want to do stuff that require you to use that function. And I think that, this study that basically showed how this ingredient can improve long-term spatial memory, I think is yet another proof how this active ingredient can actually reverse the effect of THC. Now, to me, and again, I can go on and on, this is really like a few examples here, but to me what it showed is that, and that's why I feel like it's really strong support of how this ingredient acts, because majority of those studies didn't they were not performed in order to show that it can reverse the effect of THC. It was shown completely independently. People saw this natural compound, and throughout the last decade or so, probably had the hypothesis and maybe heard reports of people consuming it and in many ways feeling better. And they said, we'll try it. And we'll try it in many models of neuroinflammation, from multiple sclerosis to Alzheimer to Parkinson, all in animal model, of course. They looked at cognitive function. They looked at the molecular mechanisms, the receptors, the pathways that might, mediate all of those effects. And they came to pretty clear conclusions. And they did it completely without thinking of THC in majority of the studies. And then when you hear a lot of people consuming soft landing and consuming this ingredient, reporting significant alleviation of some of the symptoms of THC consumption, overconsumption, then you're like, okay, this actually makes sense, because there's clear neuroprotective effects, there's clear improvement in cognitive functions in a variety of different models, and it could be the CB2 receptor, also PPR gamma, also BDNF. So there's more and more molecular evidence showing how that happens. And I'm a biologist. I'm excited by the molecular of action, the mechanism of action here, right? Like, I care about the molecules at the end of the day. And I really see a pretty cool story here building of how this ingredient might actually mitigate the effect. So if we go to the next slide, I don't know if there's another one or not. To kind of like put a bow on it, at the end of the day, we have an ingredient here that, through binding to the CB2 receptor, but through other receptors as well, is triggering neuroprotective effects, so great protective effects over our neurons, improved cognitive function. Another aspect that we didn't cover a lot is the reduction of oxidative stress. And when you see ROS here is reactive oxygen species, so there's quite a few studies showing it can reduce oxidative stress. So as antioxidant activity, we see a lot of other pathways here. So you got decreased oxidative stress and apoptosis. Again, the neuroprotection is big. Decreased inflammation is really important. To me, seeing the neuroprotective effect that eventually results in improved cognitive functions, such as, again, the memory, the spatial memory. We saw the anxiolytic effects. To me, that's like an all-array of symptoms that can really explain the effect of this ingredient. To me, as a scientist, I would say I would love to see a properly designed, well-controlled clinical trial in human, showing exactly what happens when you consume this, and can it directly reverse the effect of THC? And there's many ways of doing it. I don't know if that will ever happen. Hopefully it will happen, because I think there's quite a lot of evidence suggesting that it is. But from what's out there, combining the anecdotal data and quite a lot of literature, solid research in great journals, in very well-established animal models, I think it's clear that this ingredient has significant neuroprotective effects and a lot of mechanisms by which it actually reverses some of the adverse effects of THC overconsumption. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. Trust me, I can go on and on, but I'm not gonna. Oh yeah, thank you.
This was great. And for our viewers, we do have a link to the podcast where we did interview both Alice and Eli, so you can check out that podcast as well. And then we're going to get into some questions and answers.
We're here to educate and empower patients to make choices that are best for them. We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high. Hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I was cannabis agnostic for many, many years. And you know, the more research I did, the more I discovered that cannabis is this amazing medicine.
I was told that I had a 4-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctor really told me he couldn't do anything else. He gave me her name and she called me and she came to my house. She started to give me cannabis. My oncologist was puzzled because he couldn't find the cancer anymore.
All of the learning that we get comes from the Green Nurses Group, comes from their support, comes from their guidance. I trust everything that she says.
Simply meet people where they're at. The plant doesn't, stress to grow, so we don't stress to share it. We're healing people.
Cannabis has been used as a medicine for tens upon thousands of years. Here's the big message. Cannabis needs to be federally legal. We need to have laws that are the same across all 50 states that allow access to anyone and everyone who wants to utilize this powerful medicine.